Okay, well, the connections are still trickling in slowly, but I think we'll get started. My name is John Coonrod. I'm the founder and the U.S. chair of the Movement for Community-Led Development, and I've been really privileged to be part of the LPSA advisory group for a couple of years now. And Jamie and I have known each other for a long, long time. And I'm really happy that at a very busy time of year, I know this is the World Urban Forum is going on right now. So this is a very busy time for all of us local democracy champions. And also, it's been a very unusual time here in the United States as the elections just happened, and those of us who were favoring more democracy are suffering a little disappointment, but we are going to champion on and keep championing what we champion, which is that I always quote one of our US senators, Senator Warnock, who made the point that if every human being has dignity, if everyone has a spark of the divine, then everyone has a right to voice. And that's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that democracy, as Reverend Warnock says, is the political implementation of a spiritual ideal. So with that, I'd like to talk about how today is set up. So this is this is a session organized by the Local Democracy, Inclusive Governance, and Community-Led Development Thematic Working Group of the Local Public Sector Alliance. And we are, who you see here, are the four co-chairs. I'm told Colin cannot be with us, but I don't know if the other co-chairs are with us, but we are going to do a series of these sessions and hopefully come up with a real work plan for how we can continue to drive inclusive governance and local democracy. So our speakers today represent three of what I consider the most important organizations in the world and experiences in the world. I'm who you're seeing here. Zipporah Wambua, Dr. Zipporah Wambua is is participatory development expert, and I have witnessed this expertise. She is awesome. She has mobilized, hired, supported, trained a whole army of ward development officers to engage citizens all across McQueeney County, Kenya. And so we'll be hearing from her. Cecile Roth is a partnership officer, focal point for equality at UCLG, United Cities and Local and Regional Governments. UCLG is hugely important in the advocacy for the involvement of local government in UN processes. I've had the joy of attending many of their sessions over the years. We conspired together to pressurize to get communities and cities into the Sustainable Development Goals. That has indeed happened. And then Joy Elliman, who for many, many years was the head of the Kerala Institute for Local Administration, KELA. When I wrote a book, I put that institute on the cover because it for me is so important to the future of local democracy. When we have protests in the United States, there's always call and response. Show us what democracy looks like. And everybody says, this is what democracy looks like, but they're wrong. Kerala is what democracy looks like, because Kerala has really, really successful citizen engagement in its local democracy. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this and share something else, and then we'll get going. Share screen. So back in the run-up to the Sustainable Development Goals, I got a grant from the UN Democracy Fund to analyze and publish these reports, State of Participatory Democracy reports. And we used a framework that was a little different than the traditional framework. Traditionally, if you look at World Bank documents, they study decentralization in terms of political, administrative, and fiscal devolution. But we, after doing some consultations in all the regions of the world, people pointed out we needed two more factors in our framework: active citizenry and multi-sectoral planning. This last one was a situation in Mexico where, as you may know, in Mexico, nobody can be reelected to anything. And so the joke there is that in your first year, you find your desk. In your second year, you dismantle what your predecessor did and try to create something new. And then in the third year, you work on your resume and then you're out. So it's really important that planning, long-term economic planning, be owned not just by a political actor, but by all the stakeholders in the community. So that was our framework. We did 2 years. UNDEF wants their grants to be catalytic, and so they don't renew them. It's a little like Mexican government, but it was catalytic because it catalyzed the creation of the Movement for Community-Led Development, which is a civil society initiative to really advocate for decentralization, for devolution, for democratic practice at the grassroots level. Okay, so I'm going to just bring up my questions, and we're going to conduct today kind of as a dialogue or a discussion that hopefully all of you will be able to join, but we'll start with our key people. And so the first question that I want to pose to each of our panelists, and we'll start with Joy, is if you could briefly describe your role in local democracy, and in your case, Joy, particularly the role of KILA and the People's Plan campaign. I've been shocked to discover that a lot of my colleagues in international development really don't know about that. So if you could give us a brief introduction to your experience in local democracy.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, also giving me a chance to talk also and to be with you. Let me be very specific. It has been 28 years now since we started the People's Plan campaign. 28 years. That itself, I find as a success story, because usually it doesn't go that much such things. But okay, that's one. People's Plan campaign. And as you might know, I have been there right from the beginning of the People's Plan campaign, where we had the local governments prepare their development plans, but the funds were devolved, functionaries were transferred, the institutions were transferred to the local governments, and we created a campaign for capacity development of all stakeholders, including the citizens. That's how it started, and I was part of that from the beginning. In the meantime, I also had the chance to be part of the decentralization community of the UN Solution Exchange, where we exchanged ideas, solutions on, and because I was in charge of the decentralization community, naturally a lot of things on participatory democracy happened through that. But of late, I have been the Director General of Kerala Institute of Local Administration, where our mandate was to train elected representatives, officials of all levels beyond the local governments, because other levels of officers also are supposed to understand local democracy, because that's how it should work, and also the citizens. So we have been training them. We have been suggesting a lot of new ideas. We have been preparing a lot of things. At least 3, 4 things which I wanted to specifically say. I don't want to go back to how the People's Plan campaign happened and all the processes, but of late, for it might be interesting to John also, is we had developed this local indicator framework. Actually, it's part of the localization of SDGs, where how the local governments use a local indicator framework for planning based on the SDG framework. That was one. Second was actually the recent one is actually now local governments in Kerala are accepted as the champions for governance and and development. And that way they are there in every aspect of development, every sector and every aspect, because now we understand that this is a level which we need to strengthen. Where, for example, the local disaster management plans and also local action plan for on climate change, LAPCC, local action plan on climate change. That's again things which develop. But one of the interesting things we developed is the extreme poverty identification process by the local governments,
Huh.
where we also find that I mean, probably some of you might know, we have the women self-help groups or the neighborhood groups called Kudumba Shri. How the CBO, community-based organization, and the local government work together in a symbiotic relationship where the local government becomes the umbrella, but the CBOs have their autonomy, but how they work together, the symbiotic relationship, which is different from the parallel functioning of the various CBOs and the local governments, especially funded NGOs and other things. And now the one another which important campaign which is happening through the local development, local governments, is the Clean Kerala campaign, which is led by the local government with the active participation of the women self-help groups and all other stakeholders under the leadership of the or the umbrella of the local government. So we have been there to build, develop capacities for doing all these things. And this is how I place my
Yes.
role. Thank you.
It was, in 2019, I got to visit you at Kila, and I'd never been to Kerala because I worked for the Hunger Project, and nobody was really hungry in Kerala because they have social indicators better than Washington, D.C., thanks to just a tremendous engagement of citizens in their local government. But it was, I visited local governments all over India. Typically, they were a small hut with maybe one secretary sitting in it. And I got to Kerala, and it was like visiting Switzerland. And it's not a high income state, but here was a very professional staff managing a significant budget, standing in solidarity with these women's self help groups. In the case, I think one was in the same building as the local government that we visited, Joy, and it was really inspiring. And I think one of the people who got to visit your state, I'd like to hear from next, is my partner in devolutionary fervor, Zippy Wambua. Zippy had an NIRD fellowship that she saw in a newspaper. This is God is clearly committed to decentralization because these kind of miracles happen all the time. So, Zippy, do you want to tell us what your role is in Kenya?
Thank you very much. And that was a very breathtaking presentation from my colleague that has just gone before me. I'd like to state I work for Makueni County, which is a subnational or what we call a county government in the Republic of Kenya, Africa. One of the key things, my specific role as an officer is to ensure localization, that the principles and tenets of devolution, which is the law in Kenya concerning the decentralization and localization, that provides very, very important objectives. Number one, it provides for the responsibility for county governments to ensure subsidiarity in service delivery, proximity of development, amplifying of the voices of the people at the grassroots, including the marginalized, as well as ensuring that communities are empowered to take responsibility of their own government. And therefore, the county governments in Kenya or the subnationals have 4 key responsibilities, and that is purely what I do, my specific role here in the county. Number 1 is to ensure that there is local space for communities, for the people of Makueni, organized and not organized, to be able to take part in the implementation of service delivery for purposes of implementation of what we call devolved functions. And number 2 is the role to ensure that there are both policies and legal frameworks that ensure that the people are our decisions are inclusive, that make sure that there is effectiveness and there is government responsiveness. And as John has said, this is a key element that caused Makueni County to visit some of the states in India and just to see how the Panchayats operate in India, though it was a short visit. But we were able to see what Mahatma Gandhi has always reflected all his life about. It is until the villages become their own republic, independent, self-sufficient, freedom in decision-making, and the running of their day-to-day activities. And therefore, in the rolling out of our devolution law here at the county government, we were able to see how the local governments in India are running the Panchayats beyond looking at the challenges, but seeing where do we begin at the county level here. And that is what birthed decentralization of the administrative units of the county government, such that there are sub-county administrative offices, ward level, up to the village level, and the people themselves are able to establish themselves into committees that are able to pursue their agendas collectively. And as we had learned from India, the quest for local development plans, community action plans, that communities are able to prepare. And while at the county level, we pursue what we call participatory budgeting, at that point, we were able to see how the community action plans are able to influence collective decision-making when either the national government or the local government has come to the people to ask for issues, for funding, interventions, and requests for projects. And that became the beginning point for our localization and democracy here at the county level. And the last was the very fact that we wanted an inclusive governance system that is sustainable. And therefore, by utilizing the space within the villages, the space where the marginalized, where the youth are, where the poor residents of the county are, and the local administrative units, then we were able to take off in terms of the dimensions of where public participation should happen, as well as the accountability mechanism set across by the county. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Zippy. So recently, when MCLD started, and even before then, those of us who are localistas were telling the UN over and over again in the 1990 set of goals, the year 2000 set of goals, that really these goals can only be met at the local level. And finally, last year, the OECD agreed with us, and they said 65% of all the SDG targets can only be met at the local level. And I think the group that probably most made that happen in the world is UCLG, whose sessions at the UN have been really, really inspiring. I always attend them. And so I want to call on Cecile with the same question. Tell us about your role and UCLG's role in transforming this world from top down to bottom up.
Thank you, and thank you so much for like this framing, right? Which is really like the sense of what we do and what we still like continue working on, because it's never one. And thank you very much for the invitation, and it really is great to meet everyone on the call. So very quickly, maybe I can recall a little bit what UCLG is, and also like the history of like where it comes from, because it tells a lot on where we will go together with you and many others. On my side, I'm the partnerships officer at UCLG, so I work, as you said, like with international organizations, including the UN, but also civil society across regions. And the idea is to build action-oriented alliances and coalitions that are really focusing on scaling up impact together with the local government constituency. And I also coordinate the initiatives and the partnerships of UCLG that are related to equality. So this includes obviously gender equality and all the work that we do with the feminist municipal movement. UCLG, I'm sure many of you know, but it was founded in 2004 from the merging of the two original international associations of local governments. So it has like a history that goes back to 1913, and which is why we call it the centenary municipal movement, right? Today, it's the largest network of cities, regions, and all kinds of subnational governments worldwide, with like over always bad with numbers in English, but it's 250,000 members. And its mission is to lead this global municipal movement and to scale up again the voice of local governments on the global stage, as you've mentioned, advancing the principles of subsidiarity and decentralization, with always local democracy at the core. And through processes such as city diplomacy, and also what we call and what we create is the local multilateralism. So this alliances between local governments and different stakeholders to come together towards the global level. And yeah, the idea is to support the localization of the global agendas for sustainable development. So really bridging this gap between common goals that are decided through very global processes and the context concretely of local governments on the ground in different regions. I won't come into detail because but I do think it's important to have in mind that we have like a political leadership that is based on democratic structure, and there are like many statutory processes that is not for today, but still it's really part of what makes us different and what is also like driving the impact that we can have. And we also have a federal structure. So I'm based in Barcelona, and where is the World Secretariat, but we also have regional sections that work on specific continents, in all continents. And basically, as like a summary, what we do is policy, so movement building and advancing shared agendas on very different topics, from human rights to housing, culture, climate justice, etc. We work in terms of partnerships with two axes, and one is bridging the gap with civil society, so creating within our network spaces for dialogue and concrete like collective action with civil society. And the second is to based on those common spaces, go and call for renewing multilateralism to make it more representative. We also work on knowledge co-creation and on innovation and services, including capacity building. And our vision for democracy is really based on what is like the specificities of local democracy, and going further and showcasing how local democracy is really the foundation for trust between communities and government, the foundation for peace and for social cohesion, and really the enabler for implementing the global agendas. and always with a transversal priority, which is the equal, meaningful, and safe political participation of women, but also youth and historically underrepresented groups. And I will end, I don't want to be too long, but I just want to also mention a specific sort of way of working that we have, which is the International Observatory on Participatory Democracy. It is an international network open to all cities, but as well different partners to work on participatory democracy at the local level. It was constituted in 2001, and it has worked very closely in their office, just like downstairs, with UCLG since 2006, and it articulates an annual conference. I'm like just coming back from Valongo, where the conference for this year was in Portugal just a few weeks ago. It also has an award on citizen participation, on it has working groups, etc. So this is a little bit like, I hope, the sort of the background for today's conversation.
So 250,000 members. We'll have to get a bigger Zoom call to handle those. So the next question I'm going to kind of do as a double question. I want to ask each of our panelists to give an example of how this inclusive local democracy actually can achieve local aspirations. And then the second part of this question is, why doesn't it spill over? What are the challenges? If you have one successful community, what are the challenges in having that spread? You know, having the local communities get fired up by that same approach. So, and Cecile, I know your time is going to be limited today, so I'll go to you first. Give us an example of how local aspirations were met through this process, and what are the challenges?
Thanks. And for us, it is really always complicated to choose one example. Even like politically, we can't, you know.
Yes.
So I will, but I did wanted to bring something like particular to the conversation, and so I'll come to the latest edition of the awards of the International Observatory on Participatory Democracy. So was again celebrated just 2 weeks ago, and the award for best practice in citizen participation was given to the municipality of Iztapalapa in Mexico City. So it helps me to show like this is the reason why I showed them. It's also where I did part of the research for my master thesis, so a little bit like closer to the heart. And they won this award because they had this program that maybe you already know, which is called the Utopias, and it's the units of transformation and organization for inclusion and social harmony. And as like a little bit of a background, Iztapalapa it's within the city of Mexico. It's the most populated district, and also where above 40% of the population lives in poverty, and there are also over 30% of young people. So it is like quite specific within Mexico City. And the Utopias, it's a project that reflects, and that's why I really like wanted to bring this up, because it reflects the historical, like a long trajectory of social movements in urban peripheries to achieve the right to the city. It has done from like many different projects that were led initially by the communities, and scaled them into and institutionalized them into an integrated public policy. So it includes the construction of schools, community kitchens, health centers, children's services, affordable food supplies, urban gardens, etc. And it was led by the mayor, Clara Brugada, who is now the mayor of the whole Mexico City, but it really was based on a collective vision with the residents of the whole district through participatory processes, the different stages of the whole general process. So this is one, and then maybe, and like you can, I mean, I cannot not tell you to have a look at the web of the IOPD award, because there are like so many practices from this year, but also previous years. So this year there is, I don't know, practices on digital tools, waste collection programs, etc., youth participation as well. There is another one that was given for gender and care, specific mention in Ecuador with women leaders from indigenous communities and rural environments. So many examples, and the idea is always to connect to the local context, right? So difficult to just highlight one as like the only way forward. There's so many.
And what do you see as challenges to the spread of those ideas? Because I've always been frustrated, you know, you have like a success in Porto Alegre, Brazil, but then, you know, everybody goes, oh, this is great. And then they fail to implement it themselves. So what are the main challenges to more communities making those kind of commitments?
I think, and this is something that we see both from UCLG, but from many other perspectives, that there are like challenges that are context-based, and there are also common challenges that are like more global. And when I was thinking about the conversation today, I was really wanting to bring something to the table that is challenging, but I think we are like, it needs us to be brave, but at the same time it's also the only way forward, and it's thinking about the climate emergency. And we know that the political focus, and for many understandable reasons, has been focusing on like the ecological consequences of the climate emergency, but the climate crisis will also have implications on other aspects of our lives, and this includes our modes of governance, so including democracy now and in the future. And I think this is a general challenge that when we discuss climate crisis, we always say that democracy has to be an important part of any climate change policy, right? And we're right. But I also think that we should open and dive maybe deeper in this complex box and question to what degree democracy as it is now in our different contexts is likely to really withstand the social and political turmoil that the ecological consequences will bring about. And my point is that these consequences from the climate crisis, they're just as likely and maybe even more likely to bring to the fore calls for alternative forms of governance, including calls to replace democracy with like expert-oriented modes of eco-technocratic authoritarianism. And I do think that we need to really reflect and think deep and propose new things to make sure that our governance systems and democracy will be able to challenge these calls. Like they will be able to be a really like strong and solid, right? So the only way, and the way that we see it, is that the only way to go about this debate is to reconsider the local level, to bring this debate to the local scale, and to really see and continue working on the fact that the future of democratic governance not only has its best chances to play like an essential role in resilience, as we've seen in many contexts already, but it's also where at the local level where it has the chance, because we have the capacities there to really stand against the opponents of democratic governance.
Yep.
So not like a definite answer, but I do think it's important to go to those difficult conversations.
Yes, autocracy is patriarchy. Those are the big challenges. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly thank you for bringing up the issue of locally led climate action, because immediately after this call is actually World Resource Institute's community of practice on locally led climate action is happening in an hour and 40 minutes from now, or 20 minutes from now. That's next, but that's that. Just like they're really talking about shifting money into community, locally led climate action. They're calling for a 25% shift in climate money to community action, which would, as happened in Kerala, that you shift the money and it does shift the political economy of the action. Let me turn to let's see, to Zippy. Zippy, could you give us an example of how in McQueeney County this kind of citizen engagement has actually achieved local goals, and what have been the obstacles to making more of that happen?
Thank you very much. I have many things to talk about, but allow me to just speak about one, which is a huge success story here, that in the area of participatory budgeting. Not just going to the definition, but I'm sure we all understand about participatory budgeting and the role of communities in that resource allocation. It has done magic here in McQueeney County, Kenya. Since its beginning, we were studying it as a case study from Port Allegro many years ago in 2014, 2015. And in 2016, we began to share the tenets of the best practice of participatory budgeting. And in McQueeney County, by 2017, we began to take the communities through the 10 steps of participatory budgeting, where they identify the strategy and vision as a community at the local level, and get an objective of where they want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. And they could draw visions of what they want to be. They want to be water scarce. They want to be an agricultural community, doing community feeding the entire county, and so forth. And therefore, that led us to now take the communities to the next level in participatory budgeting, where the county government is required to provide some funding at the local level for purposes of meeting the vision for the people, the local vision. And that is what led to what we call here the Ward Development Fund. And when we began by 2018, 2019, the county government had already decentralized 20% of its budget to the people, decided by the people and implemented right within the very villages, with the resources that are among the villages and contractors that are within the villages, not outside the village. And the model has continued to grow such that now we have community sector working groups, communities that are bound together to think about climate change, communities that are bound together to think about water and natural resource management, and they are able to develop action plans that when they come to the citizen engagement forums, they are able to engage the government from a very, very organized, a unified voice, and a very objective manner. And up to the year 2023, 2024, last year, we had up to 45% of our county government budgets going squarely through the participatory budgeting model. Among the challenges that we have been able to experience is that the question of contextualizing what we have heard and read from Port Allegro, what we have heard and read from India among the Panchayats, and making our own homegrown model of citizen engagement for development and resource mobilization and implementation at the local level. At the beginning, we faced a challenge of a huge wish list. Communities have a lot of needs, and the government cannot fund all those needs, and therefore it became a challenge that our communities suffer a lot. County governments receive very little, but then we are trying to attract donors and partners at the lower level to work and walk with the local communities, and that's why at the current year we are trying to understand something we are learning from the global hunger project about the epicenter model, how we can be able to strengthen that community thinking to bring about a common agenda for all community members to avoid very small projects within the communities that at the end of the day are prone to insecurity, vandalism, and non-sustainability. So we are wrestling currently with such kind of challenges. The other is the quest for shared vision, because in the earlier governments before the constitution provided for devolution in Kenya, it was purely top down. And therefore, up to date, we are still struggling to have a shared vision of what local democracy is and how, at the subnational level, it should be demonstrated for the benefit of the people and the lower level civil society organizations. And again, is the quest for the costing for public participation. It is very expensive to undertake citizen engagement. It is also a challenge in terms of leveraging on technology, one, because of the limited capacities among the public service as well as the community members. We are wrestling with all this, but hopeful that as we continue seeing participatory budgeting bearing its fruit, because we have seen fruits, communities accessing water in minimal distances. We have seen communities that are accessing healthcare and quality healthcare, including telemedicine right here. As we continue to wrestle with these challenges, we are tending to appreciate the fact that the whole concept of participatory budgeting has brought benefits to the people themselves, and therefore they are able to fight through day by day, year after year, every budget, and we are able to review together and see what is the way forward. Another benefit that the communities have seen is that for social accountability, because with participatory budgeting, they are squarely responsible to question the government, and therefore that benefit against the many challenges that we are experiencing give us the tenacity and the resilience that it's the way to go for democratization, for development and public service. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if anyone ever wants a living example of resilience and determination, they should visit Zippy. Joy, can you give us an example and discuss the challenges to scaling this out?
Okay. One, I don't want to repeat what Sipora has mentioned about her experiences in Kenya, because it is almost same for me as we did it for the People's Plan campaign or the participatory local development plan preparation and the implementation. Hope John would understand that. So I don't want to repeat how it happened, but 28 years back, we started this participatory local development plan preparation. As I said, the funds were devolved, functionaries also were transferred, and the institutions were transferred, and participatory local plans are developed every year annually, which has been continuing for the last 28 years. And this has been actually upscaled or mainstreamed or adapted across this country, with the government of India guiding other states and local governments to, especially the rural local governments, to follow this People's Plan campaign. That's a major achievement, I would say. But under this broad umbrella, or under this broad People's Plan campaign concept and the methodology, I would like to highlight a couple of, or a few of the new things which have happened, how the communities have actually benefited. The latest one or the recent one is actually the extreme poverty identification process, where community, citizens, under the leadership of the local governments, identified the extremely poor families through a methodology, a participatory methodology. The right persons, right families were identified through through various tools adapted, which finally is a foolproof identification of extreme poverty. Because we had a lot of surveys earlier, but all ends up with a lot of complaints and other things. But here, because it was participatory with the community engagement, it happened. And as part of this, as a follow-up of the extreme poverty identification, I would say 64,006 families were identified as extremely poor. And then we have moved into preparation of micro plans for this families, because each family's poverty is, the reasons for their poverty is different. And so we need to attack poverty rightly. And we have our local governments have been doing it with the community participation, especially with the CBOs and others. And I find that out of this 64,006, already around 38,000 families have been brought outside the extreme poverty net.
Wow.
And because we are attacking only the real reasons and not of uniform, universal scheme and other things. If somebody is bedridden, the micro plan is for how to get that person's poverty, or if somebody is jobless, how to attack that. And all kinds of things. And so many other reasons are there for each of them. So this is one of the success stories, I would say, at the moment happening. And along with that, I would also say, John, that the COVID times were the times when local governments and the communities coming together and doing a wonderful job. And that is actually worth noting how our communities coped up with or fought COVID together under the leadership of local governments in a participatory manner with the community, active community participation, where the neighborhood groups and the local governments and other departments coming together. And along with that is also the local action plans preparation on climate change. And now we have actually moved into something called DCAT. That is actually Disaster and Climate Action Tracking Tool, which is being tested in the local governments, so that their actions are identified, how they are attacking or dealing with climate change and disasters, how they are planning. And it's something like a rating kind of system with 3 steps of peer review and self-appraisal and expert review and all, which is actually being implemented. But finally, just to make it short, now our panchayats or the local governments are all with IT enabled, and all the systems work, and services are almost getting 100%, almost near 100% online also, which is actually making a lot of difference for the services part of the things. And this localizing SDGs is again another tool which you are using for localization of SDGs with the local indicator framework, which is again another thing which is happening. But challenges, okay, the challenges within us is, as I mentioned earlier, now local governments have become the key players in development and governance. And so the aspirations of the people, because as the society evolves, the aspirations of the people are also going up, and citizens look towards the local governments because they consider local governments as the governments at the doorstep. And so naturally the aspirations are too high, and then there is a mismatch. So that is the challenge local governments face. And your next question is how or why I think the neighbors cannot do this. That was the next question which you asked, I think. Am I correct?
Yes.
See, actually, what I understand that with the government of India going for the entire country, local governments, rural local governments to come up with local development plans. They call it the panchayat development plans. I mean, they can plan, but there are a couple of things which we need to understand. If you are talking about participatory democracy and the participatory planning, the land relations become important. If there is a landlordism, if you are a tenant of the landlord, and then you can't expect participatory planning and participatory democracy in the real sense at the local level. And there,
Right.
our achievement is that we created that environment in the 1950s, late 1950s, where
second
we had
plan.
the land reforms, and then we followed up with the total literacy campaign, where the entire population became literate. That then led to participatory resource identification, and finally to the People's Plan campaign or the participatory planning process. So that environment creation is still important, especially with regard to the land relations, I would call. The second one is actually, it's also about the political will. Because all of us everywhere think that decentralization is good up to my level. And so the political will of devolving, because our government in 1996 decided that the 30% of the development funds simply go to the local governments for participatory planning and development. That is a big bang kind of approach which we had, and that kind of an approach is required in every state, which is the political will part of it. The third one is, nobody demands decentralization. Nobody demands participatory planning, because there is no movement of the participatory planning or local democracy at any level. So that is again a thing. And finally, when there is no effort, I find that there is no real effort to push for decentralization on a regular basis. Once in a while, in one of the states, it suddenly gets high, and then slowly it fades. And again, it's actually waxing and waning in case of this. So there's no continuity of efforts across the country, and that is also a reason for not getting this done.
Yes.
So these are some of my comments on why our neighbors are not able to. But there are individual local governments and states doing wonderful work without all these environment and other things. That is a thing which you need to really study how it happens. Thank you.
Good point. I was at the IMF meetings, and the head of the IMF said that the answer is elect more women leaders. And I think, Cecile, your example was a good example of that. So Cecile's going to have to leave shortly. So I want to put the last of our questions, and then we'll open up the floor for everybody. But Cecile, what role do you see other networks other than UCLG? You mentioned the kind of partnerships that you were creating with civil society networks. I hope you'll include my civil society network in that. But what role can networks play, particularly LPSA, this network, to advance this agenda of inclusive and participatory local democracy?
Thanks, and all my apologies for that. I'll be leaving soon, but I hope I can continue the conversation in one way or another later. But for the role of networks, what we see at UCLG and what we envision for other networks, so this is not just us, but like all the others, is to, there are like different things. But the first thing is a little bit what I mentioned very quickly earlier, is to bridge the gap between our constituencies. So what we aim to do at UCLG, and I put this as an example, but it's like then something that we can replicate on different levels. What we do is to create spaces within our network. So we not only try to engage outside, but it's also creating spaces within our own mechanisms of, for instance, defining our political priorities. So we have obviously our political leadership, which is local governments and political representatives, but then we always make sure to have mechanisms to bring the voice and to create very like fruitful dialogue with civil society organizations representing different constituencies, from women grassroots organizations to international organizations working on, I don't know, housing, or with the constituency of older persons, accessibility, etc. And this, for instance, at UCLG, it has taken the form of the town halls that we had, where civil society could bring in an organized and like self-organized way their own advocacy towards local governments. And this will also continue taking forms around a very new initiative that it's not even launched yet. It's called the Local Social Covenant, and it will also be mechanisms that will bring together both political representatives at the local level and different partners to work on culture, housing, climate justice, peace, etc., care, equality, and so on. So this is one thing, the bridge, the bridging this gap between constituencies. And then there is the part on movement building that is like, let's say, I don't know how to say, that underlies like this work around constituencies to really make sure that we build upon the power of the collective. And one thing that we do in terms of partnerships at UCLG is to create, so it's another way of working with different stakeholders, but on a global level now, which is to create high impact coalitions. This is how we call them. And the framing is that we say those coalitions that are multi-level, multi-stakeholder, and future-oriented will be the ones that can really advance the local SDG rescue plan, right? So to really scale up localization and take the step forward. And then there is another way for networks to work on a global level still, which is to embody the renewing of the multilateralism that we want to see with the UN, for instance, and to really already work in that way ourselves. So in a networked way, from a bottom-up approach always, to work on equitable representation, etc., and to create mechanisms for us to, when we engage, for instance, with the UN, and this is always what we do at UCLG, it's always representing the whole constituency of local governments. And when there is a mayor that comes to the UN, for instance, at the last Summit of the Future in September, they don't just come on behalf of their city. They come because they represent and they share the message of the whole group of local governments. And this is a lot of work behind the scenes in like trying to organize a movement like this, trying to organize, share priorities, discuss key messages that we want to bring forward, so that when there is just this person that we see and it's only one intervention and it lasts for 5 minutes or something, then it really represents a much larger process behind that. And we don't always see it, but it really is like, it represents a lot of work, and it is the strength of what we can do and change from our role as networks. And so just to mention, like those high impact coalitions that I was mentioning earlier, their power is also to speak to very different levels and to very different again, constituencies. So there is, I don't know, the Global Democracy Coalition, where we engage.
Right.
There is the Generation Equality Action Coalition that, and it's a lot, there are 6 of them, but UCLG leads the one on feminist movements and leadership. So this is also a way for us to engage and bridge this gap between the feminist municipal movement that is led by women mayors and feminist leaders all around the world, and different civil society organizations, and most of them community and grassroots organizations. They're like Cities for Children coalition that I also wanted to mention, and many more. So I think this is like a few ideas, right? To work in coalitions to bridge the gap between different constituencies, and when this gap is bridged, to go together to the global sphere. And this is then re-escalating and calling for financing for all those needs that we have at the local level, right? It's not because we just like to be featured on those panels at the Summit of the Future, it's because it has consequences later on. So yeah. And I guess a little bit late already for the next thing that I need to go, but I really wanted to thank you all for this conversation. It was really, really inspiring, and let's see how we can connect again later on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecile, and good luck with your next item.
Thanks.
So we're going to turn to the next part of this call now, which is to really hear from everybody else in the room. I really appreciate everybody taking time in their busy schedule to be part of today. And the first question I want to open the floor to is if any questions for clarifications. If any of you have questions for clarification, you could raise your little Zoom hand or write in the chat, and Lima can read it out. However it works for you. If you have things that were said that weren't quite clear, if you have questions or clarifications, we'll take a few minutes for that. Anybody?
We have a question from Narangi from Indonesia. Maybe he can directly ask the question.
Great, Narangi, go ahead. Just unmute and ask your question.
Or I can read out the question that's on the chat box.
Why don't you do that, Lima? Yeah, go ahead, Lima.
Okay. Question is directed to Zipporah. The participatory budgeting at municipalities sounds encouraging. I'm wondering how the government monitors this and how to increase social monitoring from the people. In Indonesia, we also have this participatory budgeting where municipals have full discretions, but then the spending became uncontrolled.
Aha. Yeah, I think Zippy also mentioned something relevant to that already. Zippy, do you want to address that?
Thank you very much. The reality is that participatory budgeting has to be progressive, and sometimes you really have to think through how to shift the power, when to shift the power, and the finances. I say that because in the first year, in 2022, when we delocalized around 187 million Kenyan shillings, I don't know how much that is in dollars, communities mismanaged. There was a lot of mismanagement at the local level, and we realized then there is need for greater capacity building ahead of the shifting of power. So it meant that we focus on the shifting of decision making, but rarely, and then the fiscal decentralization is closer, more monitored by the government. And this is what led Makueni County to establish the Kenya School for Devolution and Community-Led Development, because we realized other counties were also interested in this model as it is happening in Makueni, but then there are challenges, there are capacity challenges at the community level, at the public service level, and therefore we wouldn't like to transfer the same challenges to other counties, and therefore the mechanism was to partner with the Movement for Community-Led Development and establish the school that has a proper curriculum that trains at different levels so that we continue co-creating synergies and the right capacities among these local democratic units. And then lastly is the question for enablement of ICT at the lower level. I said it is both a challenge, but it is something we are embracing. If you look at even the model for capacity building through the School for Community-Led Development, here it is virtual, and we are experiencing the IT challenges even right there, the tools that are to be used for social accountability, we have to continue improving the tools, making them more citizen-driven, making them more community-led rather than government-led. And so these are some of the struggles we are having, just like you are having at Indonesia. But the quest here is to keep the hope that it is the right direction to go. We are resilient one day at a time, and we model one day at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Zippy. Lima, are there other questions that people have for clarification? If not, I will pose the next group question. So the next group question for everybody is that, as you've heard, excuse me, shifting the power, transforming the world from top down to bottom up is, as we've just seen in the United States and other countries, is a struggle. And we need evidence, we need research, we need advocacy tools. And so one of the great strengths of LPSA is its members have access to a lot of that. So I just wanted to see what you all thought about some good sources of evidence, research, advocacy tools for participatory local democracy and civil society partnership. What are some resources that you could share with not only our speakers, Joy and Zippy, but everyone on the group? So I know a lot of people in this group are actually quite expert in this area of tools and resources. So what can you all offer to this? Please just raise your hand or unmute your phone and we can call on you, or you can write it in the chat. Yes, Ramu, please go ahead. Oh, Rami, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much, John, for the opportunity. It was nice listening to Joy and Zipporah and Cecil about the experiences. I would just like to throw some light. Of course, the Kerala experience has been well articulated by Joy, and no better person can do that. But on a national level, in India, apart from, because every state has the panchayat system, there are the state panchayat acts, there are, of course, and they are being guided by certain statutes. But then we also have, and this is my recent sort of learning from certain informal groups, that there are traditional governing systems in India, which are particularly instrumental in working towards nature conservation, biodiversity conservation, and they're like all over, and they have been there even before the constitutional amendments had come into place. And I think we should also take some examples from the way those traditional governing systems have kind of constituted themselves. They take decisions, and they stand by the decision. Like, for example, in India, we have the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, which is specifically to govern the fifth scheduled areas, or the tribal areas, which are different from the non-tribal areas. They have their own customs and traditions. We have the Forest Rights Act, and one of the forests one of the examples that I would like to quote here is a small village in the state of Maharashtra, which came to fame across the country, and they were given the community forest rights because they organized themselves in conducting the community meetings, which we call the Gram Sabha. So Gram Sabha is essentially the group of people which elect a Gram Panchayat. So a Gram Sabha has got more power, constitutionally. So I guess they are. There are examples of those sort which we should also study and see that what mobilizes, what motivates them in in coming together, where even the modern panchayat system, the elected body is not able to take decisions or bring people, but at the call of a traditional governing system or a small meeting and small in a small hamlet or a thing, the participation is very high, and there are decisions, and they try to stick to those decisions. Often they try to sort of challenge popular government moves, because their decisions are in a way to challenge the state in some cases, but in some cases
Yes.
it's mostly sort of to protect their own rights, to protect their own natural resources, their culture, their traditions. So I would just like to flag this, and maybe certain examples of this sort might be also existing in Kenya or in other countries. Like I worked, I mean, Bangladesh as well, in Sierra Leone, in Myanmar. And in Myanmar also had come across, certain examples where people at the local level, despite of having a formal government system there, a local government system, they have been able to bring together changes. So that's where another example of democracy can be seen as also in India. So that's the only line of thought that I would like to focus on.
Wow, talk about a little beam of hope to have one come from Myanmar, which is so suffering these days. That's great to hear, Rami. And if there's particularly for the reference to the Maharashtra village traditional organization of Gram Sabha, if you come across a link for that, if you could share it, that would be great for us to learn from, because I think I know all across Africa that one struggle has been to balance the sort of officially constitutional mandates and the traditional authorities, how to bring that into some sort of creative synergy. Different countries have found different ways, but it's an important point. Jamie, over to you.
Thanks so much, John. As a member, not in any official capacity, I wanted to first of all thank the colleagues for sharing their experiences, but also note perhaps one takeaway about how to highlight the importance of participatory local governance that I was reminded by Joy's presentation on Kerala. Again, it's easy to overlook and it's easy to forget, because if it was done on a typewriter, it doesn't exist anymore, and time travels fast. And if it's not posted on LinkedIn within the past 24 hours, then also the report is very quickly forgotten. So the experience of Kerala is really important. But one thing that might be helpful in pitching participatory local governance outside of the more traditional community of practice around the issue is the fact that it leads to higher value for money and trust in the public sector. And that is something that and most of us obviously care about democracy and local democracy, but it's a small group. There is another group that cares about public sectors being highly efficient, but there's a relationship between these two policy objectives. And one of the things that might be a way to draw greater attention to the importance of this issue is the experience of Kerala. One of the things that stands out in a recent analysis, and Joy alluded to it, even the 15th Finance Commission in India provided a local health grant, and Kerala was mentioned as an example of how local governments have a better opportunity of leveraging these resources, and they try to use that grant as a bribe to get a positive bribe to get states interested and involved in local health services like Kerala. And for a number of reasons it failed, but one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and maybe an underutilized opportunity to sell participatory local governance to a bigger community of practice, is that Kerala actually doesn't spend more on health than others because it's localized. It's kind of middle of the pack if you look at the state level. But one of the things that happens is, because health facilities are well run and the staff is there, people show up. So Kerala has 3 times higher than the national average in India outpatients coming per 1,000 residents to public health facilities. So effectively 3 times better health services. What does that do to the price of health services? Well, per visit, it's 1/3, because you're effectively spending more or less the same, but you're getting 3 times the services. The value for money that people get in Kerala for even for one service, health, forget about all the others for a moment, is 3 times higher. Now, to the degree that we care about public sectors that provide value for money, and one might think that that is sometimes what elections are about.
I wish that were the case.
Yes, true. But to the degree that public sectors are judged on the way that they serve people, Kerala is an example, I say sometimes maybe even overlooked, but a quantifiable one, where we can very specifically say, if other places had the same level of governance, quality of governance as Kerala, the savings or the cost implication for better health service provision would be tremendous. And this is a quantifiable amount. So particularly when we go in an ecosystem where everyone is shouting for attention, whether it's climate, whether it is governance, whether it is children, and these are all good things. But what is the role of local governance? If local governance allows you to leverage and improve health services by, we're talking not millions, we're talking billions or trillions of rupees, or, lakh crores of rupees of cost savings because governance is better. That is something that allows us to quantify the importance of governance in a way that could transcend the emotional or moral importance of local governance. And so that might be an opportunity, and same for Makweni. It is, can we quantify the better service delivery or the improved service delivery and the better value for money that people get due to strengthened governance?
Yeah, I know at UNGA, I was in a session hosted by Kenya, and they just kind of casually mentioned that since devolution in Kenya, the number of reference levels hospitals increased from 2 to 40, and the number of community health workers doubled. And that was the health was the biggest, the strongest anti-devolution argument. They said, oh, well, the experts, the top down have to control health. No. Kenya is a perfect example of how devolution dramatically improved access to health, because that's what people want. And so they demanded it. We have time for, I think, one more contribution in the how to advocate or research or, yes, please go ahead, Joy.
No, exactly on what you are just mentioning and what we can actually offer, especially the LPSA effort itself is an opportunity on how we can actually share. For example, the Kenya experience and all those kinds of things coming. So, for example, we have actually developed from the local governments at least 1,200 3 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes videos on various things which have happened based on the SDG framework. So we have actually put it in thematic groups, not just 1, 2, 3, 17, but at least 10 areas or the SDG goals which are of direct relevance to local governments. And under each, 3 to 5 minutes videos have been created, developed by them. And those can be shared with any one of you, I think, and it might be available on the CLA platform, or we can actually provide it. And there are also some of these experience sharing, because these are case stories and not case studies. Studies have to be done by others. What they provide is, this is what we did. So it is not about analysis and other things, but that actually improves their confidence, increases their confidence, as well as it's a motivation for others to start thinking about new things. This is what we can actually provide as part of this exercise. Thank you.
Wow. And are those in English or Malayalam?
But it is actually, if it is in Malayalam, there will be the subscript there, or if it is English directly, also both, basically, I would say.
Wonderful. I really want to see
at least one part is actually English. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Subtitled?
That's
Subtitled or-
exciting. I'm eager to see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we're heading towards the end of this session. I really want to thank Joy and Zipporah and Celine, who did have to leave early, and everybody who has participated today. Lima, this has assured us that this recording will be available. I'm eager to share it with my network. I know. I want to share the next in this series. So, yes. No, let's see. Is that it? I think this is it. Yes. So the next of these is going to be on February 6th, 2025. It's almost 2025. Shocking, isn't it? And if you go, I'll put the link to register for this in the chat if you want to click and save on it. Oh, yeah, Lima's already put it in there. Okay, so she's put the registration link in the chat. So it would be, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your giant networks to please come and join us, because this working group does intend to work and does intend to push the rock up the hill to transform our world from this patriarchal, autocratic tendency that so many people seem to be in love with right now, to one that truly is a platform for human dignity and human voice in the decisions that affect each of our lives. Lima, do you have any final words that you want to share with everyone?
Thanks, John. I think you have covered everything, and I look forward to the next meeting. I hope everyone will join.
Wonderful.
And the recording will be shared to all the attendees eventually once it's up online.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you all, and I look forward to a more just, democratic, bottom-up future for all human beings and for our planet. Thanks so much, and see you next time. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.